My father pointed straight at me in the middle of a packed five-star restaurant and declared, without a hint of hesitation, she no longer belongs to this family. My mother sat frozen like a statue, eyes unblinking. And my sister raised her glass of wine and lightly clinked it against his. I remember the sound of glass hitting glass, soft, but as sharp as a slap. Welcome to Family Ashes, where family secrets are no longer buried under "we're doing fine" and post family photos that don't reflect anything real. If you've ever felt like the only one carrying all the bills, all the responsibility, all the shame, just to let everyone else in the family keep living in the illusion of a perfect home, then what would you do if they publicly cut you out, right on your mother's birthday? Tell me if someone in your family has ever treated you like a wallet instead of a human being with feelings and limits. The story I'm about to tell is mine, Lauren's, a daughter who took nearly 40 years to realize some roofs only get colder the longer you stand under them. I'm 38 years old, living in Austin, Texas, working as a deputy finance director at a major health insurance company. A job that keeps me so busy I sometimes forget my own birthday, but no one in my family ever forgets my payday. I'm unmarried, childless, and don't have anyone else to care for but myself. And that, in their eyes, makes me the perfect candidate for the role no one else wants, the walking wallet, the mobile bank, the one who picks up the pieces they can't, or won't, handle. My parents retired early when I was 30, claiming they wanted to slow down and enjoy their golden years. The enjoy part usually translated into utility bills, car insurance, the occasional trip to San Diego or Broadway tickets, all, of course, covered by me. My older sister, 3 years my senior, has switched jobs no less than 8 times in the past decade, always claiming she was just about to find the right fit. And my younger brother is drowning in debt from 3 credit cards and a personal loan he took out to start a business. I paid for every holiday dinner. I bought birthday gifts on behalf of the entire family. I covered my sister's rent whenever she was a few weeks late. I transferred a few $100s to my mom's account every month, unprompted. They called it gratitude. They praised me for being mature, stable, successful. But I knew those words were just a thin coat of cement covering a long-standing truth: I wasn't loved. I was used. And that duty, that obligation I never agreed to, just kept stretching, like a contract with no fine print and no end date. I knew that night wouldn't be peaceful. My mom picked an Italian restaurant in the heart of downtown Houston, the kind of place where valet alone can take an hour to return your car. She said she wanted a night to remember for her 62nd birthday. What she didn't know was that I, too, was preparing for a memorable night, just in a different way. The entire extended family showed up, over 15 people, all laughter and chatter, a swirl of colognes and perfumes, flickering candlelight on white wine glasses. There were even distant relatives I hadn't seen in nearly 8 years, invited nonetheless because Lauren's paying, so no big deal. I heard that from my aunt as I walked past the next table. It didn't make me angry anymore. It just made me more certain I was doing the right thing. That evening, I didn't bring my wallet. No credit card, no bank book, no emergency cash. I brought only one thing, a small gift, a photo book of Tuscany, a place my mother once sighed, "I wish I could go there someday," while flipping through an old magazine. I wrapped it in a sheet of the New York Times, not just to save money, but because I liked the raw honesty of a gift that didn't need decoration to be meaningful. I wanted to see what would happen if I didn't reach for my card, didn't silently slide it to the server when the check arrived. Would they manage? Or would they stick to the same tired script, with me as the backstage crew member always ready to step in when it was time to say, "Thank you for being so understanding"? I was ready not to step in this time. And maybe that's what made everything that followed so irrevocable. After the rich panna cotta was cleared away, along with the lingering laughter from a few dull stories told by the in-laws, my father suddenly stood up. He held his wine glass like a politician preparing to take the podium, gently tapping the rim with the edge of his knife, sending a ringing sound across the noisy setting. The people around the table gradually quieted, as if they had already been told he would be saying something important. I hadn't. I simply placed my napkin softly on my lap, keeping both hands steady on my glass of water. I had sat through dozens of birthday dinners like this, expensive wine, appetizers no one ever finished, hollow toasts wrapped in fake smiles and lukewarm pats on the back. But this time, something felt different. The air thickened. My father began with familiar phrases, praising my mother as a resilient woman, the heart of our family. He recalled the difficult times we had gone through together, though I couldn't quite remember when I had been included in that journey. Then he turned to look at me. His eyes were no longer soft, no longer vague as they often were. This time, they were sharp as a blade. And when he spoke, his voice remained calm, still sounded like a formal speech, but I knew clearly that what he was about to say was meant for no one else but me. "And there are those," he said, "who may share our name, but clearly no longer belong here." That sentence dropped into the middle of the table like a stone thrown into a still lake. No one laughed. No one gasped. No one said a word. They weren't shocked. They weren't confused. They just let it pass like something they had already heard before. My sister raised her glass. The pale champagne reflected the overhead lights. She clinked her glass with my father's, then looked straight at me and nodded gently. Finally. Just one word. But it echoed like the final door slamming shut in a house once called home. I looked around. My mother lowered her gaze to her plate, twisting her worn wedding ring as if counting the seconds. My cousin was scrolling through her phone. The waiter stood awkwardly to the side, unsure if he should step in with the check that hadn't been called for. In that moment, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel hurt. I just felt light. So light it was frightening, as if in that instant, all the burdens I'd been carrying, bills, wire transfers, nights crying alone after paying off someone else's debt, had suddenly floated away. I smiled. Not the smile of someone who had just been humiliated. It was the smile of someone who had finally had her suspicions confirmed. I looked my father in the eye. "Then you're paying tonight," I said, my voice airy. "A birthday gift from the outsider. Enjoy." I stood up. Took my coat from the back of the chair. Placed the small gift, the Tuscany photo book, neatly beside the untouched dessert plate. I walked out of the restaurant, my heels tapping softly against the marble floor like the final steps in a play I no longer wanted to perform. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because the only thing I left behind wasn't a family, it was a role. And that night, I chose to drop the curtain. When I walked out of the restaurant that night, the air had turned cold despite it being early October. Wind swept down the main street, carrying the scent of car exhaust and the faint sweetness of wildflowers from nearby boutique shops. I walked slowly, each step even and light, as if I no longer weighed anything. Like I had just shrugged off something that had sat on my back for decades without me realizing. I don't remember clearly how I drove home. I only know that when I opened the door to my apartment, I exhaled so deeply my chest ached. The house was quiet. Warm yellow lights, polished wood floors, neatly folded blankets, everything calm, like the version of myself I had always tried to become. I hadn't even taken off my earrings when the phone started buzzing. Then again. And a third time. My sister's name appeared first. I didn't answer. The screen went dark, then lit up again. 6 missed calls in 11 minutes. Then came my mother. Then my younger brother. The phone kept flashing like an endless seizure. I muted it. But I didn't turn it off. I wanted to see how far they'd go, now that, for the first time in decades, I wasn't there to pay. I sat down on the sofa and poured myself a glass of bourbon. No ice. No mix. Drinking it like one drinks a memory that's already died. I thought I'd feel some sense of satisfaction imagining them looking around the table, each waiting for someone else to pull out their wallet, while the server stood nearby holding a check for $3,200. But I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel angry either. I just felt empty. Not the sad kind of empty, but the kind that gives you just enough space to breathe. Around 10:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. One short, firm buzz. Then 3 more. Like the person outside wasn't planning to leave unless I answered. I walked into the hallway and glanced at the security monitor. My father. My mother. And my younger brother. Standing close together, not speaking, not looking directly into the camera. I didn't know how they'd gotten into the building, I hadn't given them the code. Maybe a well-meaning neighbor hit the buzzer, assuming they were guests. I paid for the building's security system, but it turns out privacy can still be traded away by a stranger's mistake. When I opened the door, they had already almost stepped over the threshold. My father entered first, with the same gaze I had known since childhood, cold, disciplined, and unwilling to be questioned. My mother followed, her face showing neither anger nor sadness, just fatigue. The kind of fatigue that belongs to someone who's grown too accustomed to waiting for others to apologize first. My brother looked the most uncomfortable. He glanced around the room like it was his first time here, even though he had sat in that exact chair at least 10 times before. "We need to talk," my father said, straight to the point. He didn't ask if I was available. He didn't check what I was doing. He walked in as if he still lived there. As if I were still the 18-year-old daughter who used to leave envelopes of cash on the kitchen counter whenever someone needed help. My mother set her purse down and sat in the chair without waiting to be invited. "You walking out like that," she began, voice steady, "you realize you ruined the whole mood, don't you? Today was my birthday. Everyone was looking forward to it." I didn't know if I was part of the everyone she meant. I didn't say anything. I wanted to hear why they had come. My brother stood near the door, hands in his pockets, looking both uneasy and anxious. "You know, the way you left, it shocked everyone. It felt like you were trying to make a scene. Like you wanted to stir things up in front of everybody." I curled the corner of my mouth. They said nothing about my father's words, the line, "no longer belongs here," that landed like a verdict in the middle of a restaurant. No one brought up my sister's satisfied toast. No one said a word about the public humiliation. All they spoke about was the mood, everyone, the fact that I hadn't played my usual role. I set my bourbon glass down on the table. "So who paid the bill?" I asked, not sarcastically. Just genuinely wondering how they managed, now that I hadn't stepped in. My father didn't answer. My mother rolled her eyes. My brother hesitated. They weren't there to understand. Not to apologize. Not to ask if I was okay. They came because of the $3,200 check that no one had picked up. They came to blame me for ruining the play they still wanted to keep running. And when I refused to play my part, they didn't know who else to cast. In the script they wrote for our family, I wasn't allowed to leave the stage. But tonight, I had. And they couldn't handle the silence that followed. I sat there, my back resting lightly against the chair, hands folded in my lap, listening as the 3 people closest to me in the world took turns explaining why the public humiliation I'd just endured tonight was something that could be brushed off. No one apologized. No one said, "Your father went too far," or "Your sister shouldn't have said that." They hadn't come to admit fault. They came to correct me, like someone adjusting a clock that's fallen out of sync. And the saddest part was, I wasn't surprised. My father spoke first, his voice calm, like he was running a board meeting. Not a single crack in his tone. "You overreacted, Lauren. It was just a joke. A birthday party, that's all. No one meant anything by it." "A joke," I repeated silently. A joke delivered formally, in front of more than 10 relatives, with a direct stare and a voice that never once wavered from start to finish. My mother set her water glass gently on the table, not looking at me, her eyes fixed on her hands like she was debating whether or not to pick the glass up again. "Your sister didn't mean anything by it. She just lost control. She's been stressed all month. You should have understood that." I wanted to ask, understand what, exactly? That someone can raise a glass to my exile from the family, and I'm supposed to excuse it because they're stressed? Do they think I've never been stressed? That I haven't cried in the middle of the month because I covered rent for someone else and still had to smile when I got another birthday invitation layered in unspoken costs? My younger brother took half a step back, his voice quiet but clear. "It's not about what was said. It's about how you reacted. If you had just laughed, let it go, if you hadn't gotten up and walked out, maybe everything would have been fine." That sentence made me pause for a few seconds. Not because I was hurt, but because I was stunned by the raw honesty of it. They didn't need me to stay quiet because they didn't know what they'd done was wrong. They needed me to stay quiet so things could keep running the way they always had. I was the hinge on the door they called family. And when the hinge breaks, the door falls. I looked at each of them in turn. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't confused. I had been preparing this answer for years, just never said it aloud. No, I said, my voice low but firm. The problem isn't how I reacted. The problem is that for years, I carried this entire family, carried the finances, carried the responsibilities, carried the silence so no one else would have to feel uncomfortable. And then one day, when I stopped paying, stopped staying quiet, stopped smiling through it all, suddenly I was the traitor. I paused, giving them time to process it. No one spoke. No one held eye contact for more than a second or two. My mother blinked rapidly. My brother looked down. And my father, the man who had never believed in right or wrong, only in control, looked like he was trying to calculate what happens when the last pillar walks away before he can put up a replacement. They thought I was being impulsive. That I was throwing a tantrum. That this was just a misunderstanding I'd cool off from. They didn't realize what had collapsed wasn't my feelings. It was my loyalty, something they had spent, bit by bit, until there was nothing left. And now, they were facing someone they no longer had a hold on. Someone who wasn't performing anymore. Someone who wasn't waiting for an apology. And someone who wasn't afraid of being left behind. Because the truth is, I had been left behind a long time ago. I just hadn't noticed until now. The next morning, just as the sun rose above the Austin skyline, I turned on my computer like I always did to check work emails. But my hand paused on a familiar notification, the automatic transfer to my sister's account. $150 a month, consistently, never late. It had started in March last year, after she called me in the middle of the night, her voice trembling, saying she was about to be evicted if she didn't make rent. I didn't ask many questions. I just nodded and set up the transfer like a reflex. She never thanked me. Never asked if I was okay. Every month, when the money landed in her account, I received nothing but silence. It had become the default. That morning, I sat in front of the screen, looking at the number $150 beside the cancel button. I didn't hesitate. I didn't weigh it. I clicked. No message. No warning. No explanation. For days later, the backlash rolled in like a tidal wave. First came a curt text from my sister, rent got bounced. What happened? I didn't reply. 2 hours later, the phone started ringing. And ringing. 3 missed calls. 6. 8. I finally muted the ringer and switched to silent mode. I had heard enough at the birthday dinner to know their words weren't meant to understand, only to accuse. That evening, my mother called. Her voice was high and full of blame, as if I were the one who had driven my sister into homelessness. She cried all night, my mom said. She doesn't know what's going on. Do you ever think about other people's feelings, Lauren? I wanted to laugh, but nothing came out. I turned off the phone, sat down on the couch, and poured myself a cup of black tea that had gone cold from the morning. Over the next 2 days, I received an email from a cousin in Seattle I rarely spoke to. The subject line read, "Can you lend a hand?" I opened it. Inside was a screenshot of a message from my mother, lamenting that I was showing signs of serious depression, losing control of my behavior, and needed quiet time to recover. There was even a part she sent to my uncle on my father's side. She's not herself anymore. We're worried. They were rewriting the story, line by line, memory by memory. I was no longer the daughter who carried everything, who gave quietly, who paid without asking. I had become the unstable one, a shell of who she used to be, someone who needs help but won't admit it. They couldn't handle the truth, that I had simply chosen to step away. By Saturday night, when the calls and texts had dwindled into a quieter rhythm, I called the one person I knew still listened, my grandfather. He hadn't attended the birthday dinner due to health reasons. He was also one of the few who had never asked me for anything except to visit at Christmas and tell him a few stories about life. I told him everything. Every detail. From my father's words at dinner, my mother's look, my sister's toast, to the months and years I had quietly sent money, covered debts, and kept silent. He didn't interrupt. Didn't cut in. He just listened. And when I finished, my throat dry from talking so much, he said just one sentence. "You just need to tell the truth. I'll take care of the rest." That was it. And I almost cried. Not because he was going to fix it, but because for the first time, after everything, someone stood by me without asking me to pay for it. Without needing me to prove anything. All I had to do was be honest and let go. I didn't know exactly what had happened at that brunch. All I knew was that when I checked my phone late Sunday afternoon, the screen lit up with messages that weren't like the usual ones. Not missed calls, not complaints or demands. These were hesitant, slow messages, like the senders weren't even sure they had the right to say what they were saying. Carla was the first. A quiet cousin on my mother's side, living in Galveston, always a shadow at family gatherings, the one who sat in the corner and nodded politely whenever someone said her name. We were never close. But that day, she sent me a short message. Grandpa told everything. All of it. Left nothing out. I didn't understand right away. I replied, "Told what?" And her next message nearly made me drop the phone. Brunch at Aunt Margaret's. Everyone was there, Uncle Philip, both of Uncle Raymond's sons, even their grown kids. Grandpa stood up in the middle of the meal, while people were pouring syrup over waffles, and he started talking. One story after another. He didn't skip anything. I sat frozen on my couch, eyes fixed on the screen like I was reading a verdict. Carla said he began with the birthday dinner. With my father's line, delivered like a formal declaration, without hesitation, "She no longer belongs here." With the glass my sister raised like a sentencing that didn't need a trial. With the terrifying silence at the table, like everyone agreed. Then he continued, talking about the things no one in my family had ever admitted, that for years, I was the one behind the bills. The birthday dinner. My sister's rent. My brother's car repairs. My parents' vacations. All the small, ongoing things no one ever saw as sacrifices, only obligations. I imagined their faces as he spoke. Not angry. But the kind of awkward, squirming discomfort of people being stripped bare in broad daylight during breakfast. Carla said no one interrupted him. They just went silent. Forks and knives paused in midair. Waffles left half-cut. Because even now, despite his age, my grandfather was still someone the family tread carefully around. Not because he imposed fear, but because he didn't speak often. And when he did, he never wasted words. This time, he wasted none. That evening, I got messages from people I never thought would remember I existed. A cousin in San Antonio, who once borrowed $600 from me and ghosted, wrote, "I didn't know. I really didn't know. I'm sorry, Lauren." A cousin who once called me distant messaged, "I had no idea things ran that deep. If you need anything, let me know." And one person sent nothing but a single sentence, "You deserve to live without carrying anyone else." I didn't respond to anyone right away. Not because I was angry. But because I didn't know what to feel. Touched? Relieved? Vindicated? Or just empty? Because the truth, when it finally comes out, doesn't bring the kind of freedom people imagine. It just opens a different kind of silence. One that's no longer tense, but not entirely peaceful either. I sat there, alone in my apartment, watching the city lights flicker, listening to the distant hum of traffic as the world kept spinning, as if nothing had changed. But I had just stepped off a carousel that hadn't stopped in almost 40 years. I didn't cry. I didn't feel powerful. I just felt a little lighter. So light, it was almost as if I didn't exist. And then I understood. The freedom I had earned didn't come with applause. There was no one cheering. No tight embrace. It arrived cold and quiet, like an empty room after everyone has left. You can breathe. But you also have to fill that space yourself. The cost of freedom isn't loneliness. It's that you can never go back to being who you were. You can't pretend you didn't know, can't smile out of politeness, can't keep acting after you've seen backstage. And once you choose to live truthfully, you can't expect others to stay with you. I don't yet know what life ahead will look like. But that night, when I set my phone down and turned off every device, I understood one thing more clearly than ever: I no longer had to rewrite my own story in the dark. Because those who needed to know already knew. And those who didn't want to know. I wasn't holding the role of explainer anymore. I was done being the one who carried. And from now on, I would walk forward without looking back to see who might be falling behind. I thought they'd stay silent after what Grandpa did. I thought once the truth had been laid out on the table like a dish no one wanted to touch, they'd stop. But I forgot, truth, in my family, is never the ending. It's just a temporary disruption in the ongoing war for narrative control. And they struck back in their own way, cold, wordless, and full of symbolism. 1 week after the brunch, I got a message from the front desk of my building. A package had arrived for me, sender unknown. I went downstairs with mild curiosity, since I hadn't ordered anything. It was a medium-sized cardboard box, sealed with old packing tape, no shipping label, no sender address. Just my name, scrawled in black marker, messy, but familiar. I recognized the handwriting. It was my mother's. I brought the box upstairs, set it on the table, and opened it. Inside were a few old shirts I had left behind at their house long ago, the kind I wore in college, the fabric worn, colors faded. There was a white coffee mug with the phrase "You got this" printed on it, the one I used to keep at my old office. There was a photo of me around age 10, standing in front of the house with pigtails and a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. And there was a card. The kind of cheap card you get from a dollar store, decorated with faded floral borders. Inside, in the center of the otherwise blank page, was one line. If this is what you want, then here it is. No signature. No explanation. No "we love you." No "we're disappointed." Just a cold severing, wrapped in meaningless relics. I stared at the box for a long while. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I just felt something lift, something ease inside me. They wanted me to understand that I had separated myself from them, and now they were doing the same. But what they didn't understand was that I had already left. The day I walked out of that restaurant without looking back, I stopped existing inside the structure they were trying so desperately to preserve. I took the box down to the recycling bin on the corner. Not because I hated what was inside, but because none of it said anything about me anymore. Those were objects from a version of me they used to control. I didn't need to keep the evidence. I didn't need to hold on to artifacts of what I'd survived. That night, I did what I had put off for years. I deleted every phone number tied to them, my father, my mother, my sister, my brother, and even the ones who had silently taken their side. I left every family group chat, Thanksgiving planning, family only, mom's health. I canceled the Dropbox account I had once shared with my sister to store pictures of her children, kids I'd never even met. I logged into my phone plan and removed the secondary line my brother still used to make free calls. I deleted. I canceled. I disconnected. Not a single one of those actions made me feel pain. Nothing held me back. There was no conversation worth saving, no memory worth clinging to. Just scraps from a role I had already refused to keep playing. Cutting off isn't shattering. It's shutting down. It's taking the battery out of a clock that's been running wrong for years. And when real silence filled my apartment that night, I knew something with more certainty than I had ever known before: this wasn't a loss. This was a return. A return to myself. Without the role. Without the apology. Without any box of old things to remind me I had once existed inside a family that couldn't accept my real self. I didn't know what exactly led me to the mountains. Maybe it was because I had grown too used to living between missed calls, cryptic messages, and group chats that made my heart sink every time a notification buzzed. Or maybe I needed a place where no one knew my name, where no one could summon me, expect from me, or quietly guilt me. I didn't plan the trip in detail. I just typed a few words into the search bar: remote cabin, Colorado. I wanted quiet. I wanted cold. I wanted wind slipping through wooden cracks like the breath of someone still alive. And I wanted disconnection, in both senses of the word. I chose a cabin nearly 30 miles from the nearest town. No signal. No Wi-Fi. Nothing tethering me to the outside world except the option to return. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel abandoned. I chose to separate myself. When the plane landed in Denver, I didn't feel excited. There was no sense of adventure like the kind people talk about in healing trip articles. I just felt empty. But it was a clean kind of empty, like a room freshly swept, with no old dust clinging to your palms. The driver who took me up the mountain was a woman around 50, salt and pepper hair, her voice neither warm nor cold. When she stopped at the trailhead leading to the cabin, she looked at me through the rearview mirror and asked, "How long are you staying?" I said, 7 days. She nodded. Asked nothing else. That nod felt like a blessing unspoken. I hope you find something worth keeping. On the second morning, I wandered into a small nearby town, just a coffee shop, a handmade candle store, and a flea market where the sellers outnumbered the buyers. I stopped at a stall selling handmade books and journals. The leather covers were rough, the pages not bright white, each one slightly coarse and sun-faded, like they had passed through many hands. The woman arranging them looked up at me and said, "You seem like someone carrying a lot of stories." That line, so simple, made me stop for a few seconds. Maybe because it was true. I had carried too many stories, but I had never written them down. I chose a dark brown journal that fit neatly in my hand, unlined. That night, sitting beside the small wood-burning stove in the cabin, I pulled out a pen. I opened to the first page and began writing in my own handwriting, the same handwriting I used to hide, the one I had tried to neaten, adjust, make more presentable, so it would be easier to accept. I will not apologize for outgrowing the version of me that made others comfortable. I read that line over and over again. It wasn't a declaration. It was a confirmation. That I had grown. Not in age, but in the sense that I had stopped living according to scripts written by other people. I was no longer the quiet, obedient, faceless version of myself. I had stepped out of the shadow of the good one to become someone real. And maybe that made others uncomfortable. But I would no longer apologize for that. On the fourth day, I spent the entire morning writing my story. I left nothing out. I didn't soften it. I didn't dilute it. I wrote down every single thing I had done, the money I transferred, the gifts I quietly signed from all of us, the times I stepped back so others could step forward. I wrote about that dinner, about my father's words that cut like a blade, about my mother's eyes that didn't stop it, and my sister's satisfied toast. I wrote it because I needed to see it all laid out, as proof to myself that I hadn't imagined this pain. I sent what I wrote, along with a few photos of receipts, some text message screenshots, to 8 people, not many, just the ones I knew had been told a different version of the story. I didn't send it asking for sympathy. I sent it to close the loop. To stop being misunderstood. To stop holding the narrative inside me. I ended the letter with a single line: "I don't need you to believe me. I just can't keep pretending silence is the same as keeping the peace." Only 2 people replied. Nathan, my cousin, the one I once helped buy his first car. He wrote, "I didn't know it was like this. I'm sorry. You deserve more peace than this." The other was my uncle, my mother's younger brother. He messaged one short sentence: "Now I understand why you stayed silent for so long. Thank you for telling it." Just 2 people. But that was enough. Not because they believed me, but because for the first time in my life, I didn't write to be believed. I didn't tell it hoping for a nod of agreement. I wasn't living to please anyone anymore. I wrote because I needed to see the truth, in my own voice. Not trimmed down. Not warped. Not retold as she's just too sensitive. That night, I lit a small candle in the cabin. Outside, wind passed through the pines, cold, sharp, and clean like a beginning. I placed the journal beside my bed, the candlelight flickering against the white page like a quiet reminder. I had written. I had lived. And this time, I didn't need anyone to read it to make it real. This was rebirth. No fanfare. No victory parade. Just someone who had finally dared to live for herself. And had the courage not to apologize for it. I used to think that if I ever walked away from my family, it would feel like losing a limb, like someone cutting the final thread between me and what I once called roots. But it didn't. There was no blood. No pain. Just a sense of lightness, like slipping off a pair of shoes that were far too tight after wearing them all day. Not because I hated the shoes, but because I finally admitted they had never really fit. Now, when I think of them, I don't feel longing. And that used to make me feel guilty. How can you not miss your own family? But then I realized, I don't miss them because they never really remembered me. They remembered what I did for them. Remembered the person behind the camera, behind the bill, behind every thank God Lauren was there. They didn't remember me, the whole person, messy and complicated, sometimes tired, sometimes angry, always trying to understand but never once asked, "Are you okay?" I didn't walk away from my family. I walked away from a script I was never allowed to write. I was born into it, handed a role, and every time I tried to deviate from the lines, the whole stage would freeze, just to remind me, this isn't your story. You're just here to keep it running on cue. But I don't want to live like background software anymore. I don't want to be a supporting character in my own life. And if stepping out of the role makes them call me the villain, then so be it. I'd rather be the villain in their story than stay the victim in mine. Because villains, at the very least, get to say no, they get to stop. To turn away. To drop the weight that was never theirs to carry. Victims, they only exist to endure. And I've endured enough. Now, every morning when I wake up, I don't have to check messages to see who needs something from me. I no longer ask myself, if I don't help, how will they manage? Because I've realized, they always had ways. I was just the easiest one. I make coffee for myself. I go for walks not to escape shouting, but to listen to my own breath. I write without fearing I'll be misread. I speak without waiting to be understood. And I live, finally, not as anyone's version of me, but as myself. Not perfect. Not convenient. But real. And if that makes me uncomfortable to someone, then they're free to leave. Just as I once left. Not because I stopped loving. But because I started learning to love myself. And real love never demands you disappear so others can feel at ease. Never. What about you? Have you ever stepped out of a relationship, not because you stopped loving, but because you could no longer accept a role you never agreed to? Have you ever been called selfish just because you said no for the first time? Tell me your story. Even if it's just a moment where you chose yourself. Even if it's just a quiet refusal. That alone is proof you're living truthfully. Because sometimes, the greatest lesson we learn isn't how to forgive others, but how to stop apologizing for having the courage to change. Leave a comment if you've ever been the one carrying your whole family, and one day, you let go, not to run away, but to be free. And if this story speaks to something inside you, don't forget to follow Family Ashes. Here, we don't sugarcoat family, we tell the truth. And truth, sometimes, is the very beginning of healing.